The single mother agrees to care for the cold millionaire's triplets. The children are rebellious, emotionally needy, and reject any affection. With love and firmness, she transforms pain into family bonds. But when the millionaire realizes this, everything spirals out of control. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. We'll continue. Sarah adjusted the improvised name tag on her borrowed uniform as she climbed the marble steps of the imposing mansion. Her hands trembled slightly, not because of the magnitude of the place, but from the weight of responsibility she carried. In her tiny apartment, Michael, her 6-year-old son, was under the care of her neighbor, a kindness that couldn't last much longer. The opportunity had appeared like an unexpected gift, a nanny position with one of the wealthiest families in the city, offering a salary 3 times higher than her current part-time job at a diner. The call from the employment agency had come the night before, while she was counting coins to buy Michael's medicine. "Ms. Sarah Collins?" The butler's deep voice echoed through the entrance hall, interrupting her thoughts. "Mr. Richard Miller is waiting for you in his office." She followed the man through corridors decorated with artwork that seemed to cost more than all her years of rent combined. Her worn flats made a soft noise on the polished floor, constantly reminding her of her place in this parallel universe of luxury and privilege. The office was an imposing room, with floor-to-ceiling shelves filled with leather-bound books. Behind, a massive mahogany desk, a man of approximately 40 observed her with penetrating eyes and a severe expression. Richard Miller had the countenance of someone who rarely smiled. "Your credentials are interesting," he commented without greeting her, leafing through a folder. "Experience in community daycares, recreation supervisor? Not exactly the profile we were looking for." Sarah felt her stomach sink. "Mr. Miller, I can assure you that—" "However," he interrupted her, "something peculiar happened in the selection process. There was a mix-up with the resumes and you were called by mistake. I discovered this just a few minutes ago." The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah could hear her own accelerated heartbeat. All the planning she had done, all the bills she had mentally reorganized were crumbling before her eyes. "But since you're here," Richard continued, surprising her, "I'll propose something different. 3 days of probation, no commitment from either side. I need someone to start immediately, and the original candidate wouldn't be available until next week." Before Sarah could fully process the proposal, the sound of breaking glass reverberated down the hallway, followed by children's shouts. Richard didn't even blink, as if this were part of his routine. "Those are my sons," he explained, showing no emotion. 8-year-old triplets, Luke, Matthew, and John. The latest diagnosis suggests John might be neurodivergent, but we aren't certain yet. The other 5 nannies who've worked here this year didn't last more than 2 weeks. Sarah swallowed hard but remained composed. "I can start right now." Richard raised an eyebrow, the first sign that something had surprised him. "Don't you want to know the salary, the conditions?" "With all due respect, Mr. Miller, I need this job, and from what I heard in the hallway, you need urgent help. We can discuss the details after I meet the children." Another crash, this time closer, made the office chandelier sway. Richard stood up, adjusting his immaculate suit. "Very well, Sarah. I'll introduce you to the boys. But first you need to understand something. This house has strict rules. The main one is never, under any circumstances, to mention Rebecca, their mother. This is a forbidden topic." Sarah nodded, even as she felt a tightness in her chest. As a mother, she couldn't imagine children being forbidden from talking about the woman who brought them into the world, but she kept this reflection to herself. She had 3 days to prove her worth, and she couldn't afford to start by questioning the house rules. As they left the office, they found 3 identical boys standing in the hallway, observing the scattered shards of an antique vase on the floor. Their gazes were a mixture of defiance and curiosity. Sarah took a deep breath, knowing her real test was just beginning. The triplets appeared identical at first glance, but Sarah quickly noticed the subtle differences in their expressions. Luke, the tallest by centimeters, maintained a defensive posture like a small guardian. Matthew bit his lower lip, betraying his anxiety, and John, whom she intuited to be the neurodivergent one, swayed slightly back and forth, his eyes fixed on an invisible point on the wall. "Boys, this is Sarah. She'll be your new nanny for the next 3 days," Richard announced with the same coldness he displayed in the office. "I expect you to behave appropriately this time." Without waiting for a response, he checked his wristwatch and added, "I have a video conference in 5 minutes. Sarah, the butler, will show you around the premises and explain your duties." And just like that, as abruptly as he had appeared, Richard Miller vanished, leaving a heavy silence in the air. Sarah observed the 3 children now under her responsibility, trying to decipher the best approach. "So," she began with a gentle smile, "who's going to help me clean up these shards before someone gets hurt?" Luke crossed his arms. "Are you going to tattle on us to Dad?" "Tattle what?" "As far as I know, accidents happen," Sarah replied, already kneeling to start cleaning, "but it would be great to have help to prevent them from happening again." Matthew was the first to approach, picking up the small dustpan the butler had discreetly left nearby. John remained in his own world, but his eyes occasionally turned toward the movement of the broom on the floor. While they worked, Sarah started a casual conversation. "You know, my son Michael is also an expert in household accidents. Last week he tried to make a milkshake by himself and turned our kitchen into a skating rink." The mention of Michael caught the attention of all 3. It was John who asked, his voice surprisingly clear, "You have a son?" "I do. He's 6 years, old and loves to draw, especially superheroes in unusual situations like Batman shopping at the supermarket." A small smile appeared on John's face, the first Sarah had seen on any of the boys. Luke, however, maintained his skeptical posture. "Why isn't he here with you?" "Because first I need to get to know you, right? See if we get along, if the house is safe for him," Sarah explained honestly. "He's with our neighbor today." "And his dad?" Matthew asked timidly. Sarah took a deep breath. "It's just the 2. However, sometimes families come in different formats." The comment provoked a reflective silence among the boys. Sarah realized she had touched a sensitive point and quickly changed the subject. "How about showing me your favorite places in the house?" John, who until then had kept his distance, took a step forward. "Can I show you my miniature collection?" "I'd love to see it," Sarah replied with genuine interest. As they followed John down the hallway, Sarah noticed Luke and Matthew exchanging significant looks. Later, she would discover that none of the previous nannies had shown genuine interest in John's obsessive collections, considering them just another symptom of his difficult behavior. In John's room, meticulously organized shelves displayed hundreds of miniature figurines, each positioned at a specific angle. The boy began to explain his classification system, his eyes shining with enthusiasm. "This is the feline section," he explained, pointing to a row of small cats. "They're organized by size, color, and natural habitat." Sarah observed attentively, asking pertinent questions that made John increasingly animated. From the corner of her eye, she noticed Luke and Matthew gradually approaching, their curiosity overcoming their initial distrust. The presentation session was interrupted by the sound of Sarah's phone. It was her neighbor reminding her that she would need to leave in 2 hours. The reality of her own challenges returned with full force, but Sarah maintained her composure. "Boys, I need to make a quick call. Can we continue this later?" "Promise?" John asked, a touching vulnerability in his voice. "I promise. And maybe tomorrow I can bring some of Michael's drawings for you to see." For the first time, the 3 brothers seemed unanimously interested in something. Sarah left the room feeling she had won a small victory, but knowing that the real challenges were still to come. In less than 2 hours, she would need to find a solution for Michael, and in 3 days, prove that her hiring mistake could be the best decision Richard Miller had ever made. Sarah's first week at the mansion unfolded like an emotional roller coaster. The initial 3-day trial transformed into 7 when Richard, without much explanation, simply continued acting as if she were a permanent employee. What he didn't know was that each extra minute represented a small victory in Sarah's private battle. The biggest challenge wasn't the triplets, but the logistics of caring for Michael. Her neighbor, Mrs. Wilson, couldn't keep him all day anymore, and the full-time schools had closed their enrollment. It was during a particularly tense afternoon, as Sarah mentally organized her increasingly scarce options, that John surprised her with an observation. Why doesn't Michael come here? The question, asked during a session organizing his miniatures, caught Sarah off guard. John rarely initiated conversations, preferring to respond when questioned. Even more surprising was seeing Luke and Matthew, who were playing in another corner of the room, stop to listen to her answer. "It's not that simple, John. Your father would need to authorize it, and—" Sarah began but was interrupted by Luke. "We can ask him," the boy suggested, his usual defensiveness giving way to contained enthusiasm. "There's plenty of space here, and we promise to take care of him." Matthew, always the most sensitive of the three, added, "He can stay in the guest room on our floor. Nobody uses it anyway." Sarah felt a lump in her throat. In just 1 week, she had witnessed small changes in the boys. John smiled more frequently. Luke had lowered his guard somewhat, and Matthew was less anxious. The possibility of bringing Michael closer was tempting, but also frightening. "I'll think about how to talk to your father about this," she promised, knowing it would be a delicate discussion. The opportunity arose that same evening when Richard returned earlier than usual from work. Sarah found him in his office reviewing documents with his usual focused concentration. "Mr. Miller, may I have a moment?" He looked up from his papers, his expression unreadable. "Is there a problem with the boys?" "No, actually, they're surprisingly well. It's about my son, Michael." The silence that followed was tense, but Sarah continued, "I'm having difficulties arranging his care during the day, and the children suggested, well, they suggested that he come here." Richard put down his pen, leaning back in his chair. "The children suggested this?" "Yes, it was their idea, especially John's." The mention of his most introverted son genuinely caught Richard's attention. "John talked about this?" "He's been talking more in the last few days," Sarah explained. "About various subjects, actually. Yesterday he explained his entire miniature classification system to me. Did you know he organizes them not just by species, but also by habitat and feeding habits?" A shadow of emotion crossed Richard's face. "Rebecca used to—" he began, but stopped abruptly, as if he had broken his own rule. Sarah pretended not to notice the slip, keeping the focus on the main issue. "I understand if it's not possible, but I thought we should consider it. Michael is 6 years old. He's well behaved, and does he have any health issues?" The direct question caught Sarah by surprise. "Yes, he has a respiratory condition that requires constant care. It's one of the reasons I need a stable job." Richard remained silent for several minutes, his gaze fixed on a picture frame turned face down on the desk, the only personal object visible in the austere office. "Bring him tomorrow," he finally said. "We'll see how it works for a few weeks, but I need you to sign additional terms in the contract, and any medical expenses will be your responsibility." "Of course. I completely understand." As Sarah turned to leave, Richard's voice stopped her. "And Sarah, how is John really?" It was the first time she had heard him show genuine interest in one of his sons. "He's brilliant, Mr. Miller. He just needs someone who understands his unique way of seeing the world." That night, as she picked up Michael from Mrs. Wilson's house, Sarah allowed herself to truly smile for the first time in weeks. The next day, her small family would gain a new address, even if temporary. What she didn't know was that this change would trigger a series of events that would transform not just her life, but that of all the inhabitants of that seemingly cold mansion. Michael's arrival at the mansion was like a ray of sunlight breaking through dense clouds. The boy, with his large curious eyes and easy smile, brought a different energy to the austere environment. His colorful drawings, which previously adorned only the walls of their small apartment, now began to appear discreetly in corners of the house, like small flowers blooming in a long abandoned garden. The triplets, especially John, developed an immediate fascination with Michael. The boy had a natural talent for understanding John's peculiar world, accepting his detailed explanations about miniatures with genuine interest and contributing his own observations through drawings. "Look, John, I drew this lion the way you explained," Michael showed one day, proud of his artistic work. "With the bigger mane because it's from a cold climate, just like that special miniature you have." John, who rarely showed intense emotions, hugged the drawing to his chest. Luke and Matthew, observing the scene, exchanged significant looks. It was the first time they had seen their brother connect so naturally with someone. However, not everything was smooth sailing. On the third night after his arrival, Michael had a severe respiratory attack. Sarah, accustomed to these emergencies, acted with quickness and efficiency, but the episode attracted the attention of everyone in the house. Richard, who normally kept his distance from domestic matters, appeared at the bedroom door still wearing his impeccable suit. His eyes, habitually cold, showed a concern that he tried, unsuccessfully, to disguise. "Is everything under control?" he asked, watching Sarah administer the medication with precision. "Yes, these episodes are expected. He has all the necessary support," she responded, without diverting her attention from her son. What no one expected was the triplets' reaction. Luke, the oldest by minutes, took responsibility for fetching water. Matthew brought an extra blanket. And John, surprisingly, sat next to Michael and began to talk about his miniatures in a low voice, creating a welcome distraction during the treatment. The next morning, Sarah found an envelope on her desk. Inside was an authorization to include Michael in the family's premium health insurance plan, signed by Richard. "I can't accept this," she said when she found him in his office. "This must cost a fortune." "Consider it an investment in everyone's safety," he replied without raising his eyes from the documents he was analyzing. "His attacks could affect my son's well-being. It's just a preventive measure." But Sarah noticed something different in his voice, an almost imperceptible softness that wasn't there before. It was as if Michael's vulnerability had cracked, even minimally, the armor that Richard had built around himself. The following weeks brought a routine that gradually transformed the household dynamics. Michael and John became inseparable, spending hours creating elaborate stories with the miniatures, which now came to life through the younger boy's drawings. Luke, always the protector, began to show a softer side, especially after discovering that Michael also loved superheroes. Matthew, meanwhile, found in Michael a partner for his musical adventures on the old piano in the living room, which had remained dusty and unused for years. It was during one of these improvised music sessions that something extraordinary happened. Richard, passing through the hallway, stopped upon hearing the awkward but enthusiastic notes of Happy Birthday that the boys were trying to play. "My wife," he began, his voice faltering slightly. "Rebecca used to play piano for them every night." Sarah, who was organizing some toys near the door, froze upon hearing the forbidden name, but Richard continued, his eyes fixed on the piano. "She used to say that music was the language of the soul, that even when words failed, the notes could express what we felt." It was the first time he had voluntarily mentioned any memory of Rebecca. The moment, however, was interrupted by the sound of the telephone. Richard instantly composed himself, his mask of coldness returning to place, and headed to his office. But something had changed. A small breach had opened in the wall of silence surrounding Rebecca's memory, and through this breach, a different light began to illuminate the dark corners of that house, revealing that, beneath the surface of order and discipline, pulsed a family trying, even if unconsciously, to find its way back to life. Autumn arrived, bringing winds of change to the Miller mansion. After 2 months of cohabitation, Sarah and Michael's presence had established a new dynamic in the house. Smiles were more frequent, meals less silent, and even Richard occasionally allowed himself to participate in family moments, albeit briefly. It was during one of these atypically peaceful mornings that the first storm arrived, in the form of a society magazine casually left on the breakfast table. On the cover, an elegant woman smiled next to the headline, "Amanda Taylor, the Philanthropist. Revolutionizing Special Education." Richard paled at the sight of the publication, his hands gripping his coffee cup tightly. Sarah, who was serving the children's cereal, immediately noticed the change in his posture. "Take that away," he ordered, in a voice that Sarah had never heard before, a mixture of anger and contained fear. But it was too late. John had already recognized the woman in the photo. "It's Aunt Amanda!" he exclaimed with unusual animation. Sarah observed how Luke and Matthew instantly shrank in their chairs, as if trying to become invisible. The reaction of the older boys contrasted drastically with John's innocent enthusiasm. "Is she coming back to visit us?" John continued, oblivious to the growing tension. "She always brought nice presents and—" "John, enough!" Richard struck the table so hard that the cutlery rattled. The boy recoiled, his eyes immediately filling with tears. It was Michael, with his unique sensitivity, who broke the moment of tension. He approached John and, without saying anything, took his hand under the table, a gesture of solidarity that didn't go unnoticed by Sarah. "Boys," she intervened calmly, "how about we go organize the miniature collection? Michael made some new drawings last night." The children quickly abandoned the table, leaving Sarah and Richard alone in the dining room. The silence that followed was as heavy as lead. "Ms. Sarah," Richard finally spoke, his voice controlled, but tense, "I need you to understand something. Amanda Taylor is a forbidden subject in this house as much as other subjects we've discussed." Sarah gathered courage to question. "Mr. Miller, with all due respect, I noticed that your reaction and that of the older boys is very different from John's. It would be important for me to know—" "What you need to know," he interrupted her, "is that she is not welcome here, and if by chance she tries to make any kind of contact, I must be informed immediately." That afternoon, while the children played in the garden, Sarah found Luke alone sitting on the windowsill of the library. His distant gaze betrayed that something was troubling him. "Want to talk?" she offered, sitting beside him. Luke remained silent for a few minutes, his fingers tracing invisible patterns on the window glass. "Aunt Amanda isn't as nice as John thinks," he finally said, his voice low but firm. "Why do you say that?" She pretended," Luke continued, carefully choosing his words. "Pretended to like us, but I heard her talking with her friends on the phone, laughing at us, especially at John because of his way." Sarah felt her heart tighten. "And did you tell anyone about this?" "Dad. But by then she was already gone after everything." The everything hung in the air like a dark cloud, carrying secrets that Sarah still couldn't decipher. But before she could question further, they heard Michael's voice calling from the garden. "Luke, come see! John managed to teach Rex the new trick." The boy's face lit up momentarily, concern giving way to a genuine smile. Rex was the stuffed dog that Michael had brought from home, which now served as the mascot for their collective games. "Can I go?" he asked, already standing up. "Of course," Sarah smiled, but gently added, "Luke, thank you for trusting me." The boy nodded and ran to join his brothers. Sarah remained in the library, her gaze alternating between the discarded magazine on the table and the children playing outside. An uncomfortable sensation began to form in her chest, as if the past they tried so hard to bury was about to resurface, bringing with it revelations that could shake the fragile foundations of the peace they had built. In the week following the magazine discovery, Sarah noticed subtle changes in the behavior of the mansion's residents. Richard spent more time at home, even if locked in his office. The triplets, especially Luke and Matthew, seemed more protective of each other. And John, though maintaining his routine with the miniatures, was strangely quiet. It was during a rainy afternoon that Sarah found something that began to piece together the puzzle. Helping John reorganize his miniatures, she noticed a notebook hidden among the shelves. It was different from the boy's other belongings, older, with worn edges and elegant feminine handwriting on the cover. "Memories of my little ones." "John, what notebook is this?" she asked gently. The boy picked up the notebook with reverential care. "It was Mom's," he answered, his voice almost a whisper. "She wrote about us in here. But don't tell Dad, please, it's a secret." Sarah felt her heart tighten. It was the first time one of the boys had voluntarily mentioned their mother. "May I see it?" John hesitated for a moment, but then opened the notebook. The pages were filled with notes, drawings, and photographs. Each triplet had their own sections, with loving observations about their developing personalities. "She understood," John commented, running his fingers over a page that described his first fascinations with patterns and numbers. "She didn't think I was strange." At that moment, Michael entered the room carrying his drawing materials. Seeing the notebook, his eyes brightened with artistic curiosity. "That's cool! Can I draw too?" John surprisingly didn't hesitate. "Can we make our own notebook, like Mom's?" The idea lit up Michael's face. "Yes, we can draw all the stories you tell me about the miniatures." And so a secret project was born between the two boys. Sarah observed from a distance how they created their own illustrated diary. Michael drawing the stories that John told about each miniature, blending old memories with newly imagined adventures. One afternoon, while the boys were working on their secret project, Matthew appeared at the door carrying something in his hands. "I found this in the attic," he said, showing an old music box. "It was Mom's. She used to play it for us to fall asleep." Sarah realized it was the first time. Matthew had also spoken about Rebecca. The boy sat down next to the others and carefully opened the box. A soft melody filled the room, bringing tears to the triplets' eyes. "Can I draw the music box too?" Michael gently asked. As the children worked together, now incorporating the music box into their story, Sarah heard footsteps in the hallway. It was Richard, who briefly paused at the door upon hearing the melody. His face, normally impassive, showed deep emotion before he quietly withdrew. Later that night, after putting the children to bed, Sarah found Richard at his usual post in the office. She noticed that the picture frame, previously always face down, was now subtly adjusted, partially revealing the photo of a smiling woman with 3 babies in her arms. "Mr. Miller," she cautiously began, "the children found some mementos today." "No," he interrupted, but his voice was different, softer. "I heard the music box." "They need this," Sarah continued. "They need to be able to remember to talk about her." Richard remained silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the photograph. "Rebecca had a special gift with them," he finally said, "especially with John. She always said he wasn't different, just saw the world in a unique way. Like her." Richard raised his eyes, surprised. "How did you know?" "John showed me her notebook today. The way she wrote, how she observed every detail about them. She also saw the world in a unique way, didn't she?" A solitary tear ran down Richard's face, the first Sarah had ever seen him shed. But before he could respond, a sharp cry cut through the night's silence. It was Michael, having another one of his attacks. Michael's attack that night was different from previous ones. The medication was taking longer to take effect, and his breathing remained irregular. Sarah maintained external calm, but her heart was racing. That's when something unexpected happened. Richard, who was observing from the doorway, entered the room and knelt beside the bed. "What do we need to do?" he asked with controlled urgency. "We need to take him to the hospital," Sarah responded, already grabbing the bag with her son's documents. "The nebulizer isn't sufficient this time." "I'll drive you," Richard declared, already taking the car keys. "It will be faster than waiting for an ambulance." The triplets, awakened by the commotion, appeared at the bedroom door. John especially seemed distressed by his friend's suffering. "Children, stay with the housekeeper," Richard ordered, but his voice was softer than usual. "Sarah and I will take Michael to the doctor." During the journey to the hospital, Richard drove with precision and speed, occasionally looking in the rearview mirror at the back seat where Sarah held Michael. The boy, between difficult breaths, clutched the drawing notebook he shared with John to his chest. At the hospital, while waiting for care, Richard surprised Sarah again. "I'm going to call Dr. Thompson, my pediatrician friend. He's a specialist in respiratory cases." Before Sarah could protest, he was already on the phone. In minutes, Dr. Thompson arrived, personally taking charge of Michael's care. After exams and appropriate treatment, the boy finally fell asleep. His breathing normalized. "He'll be fine," the doctor assured them. But we need to adjust the preventive treatment. I'll schedule an appointment at my office for next week." When the doctor left, Sarah turned to Richard. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to," he interrupted, but without the usual coldness. "Michael is already part of the household now." The next morning, upon returning to the mansion, they found the triplets anxiously waiting. John carried one of his most precious miniatures, a small golden lion that he never let anyone touch. "It's for Michael," he said, extending the lion, "to help him be strong." Michael, still pale but smiling, accepted the gift with reverence. "Can we put him in our story notebook?" he asked. "What notebook is that?" Richard questioned, noticing the exchange of glances between the children. Sarah felt the moment of tension, but before she could intervene, John answered with disarming honesty. "It's like Mom's notebook. We draw stories in it." The silence that followed was dense. Sarah expected another outburst from Richard, like what happened with the mention of Amanda, but, to her surprise, he merely nodded slightly. "Your mother loved telling stories," he said softly, surprising everyone. His sentence was interrupted by the sound of the doorbell. The butler appeared moments later, holding an official envelope. "Sir, this correspondence arrived from the court." Richard took the envelope, his face losing color as he read its contents. Sarah observed how his hands trembled slightly. "Sarah, take the children upstairs, please," he requested, his voice tense. Later, that same night, Sarah found him in his office, papers scattered across the desk and a half-empty glass of whiskey. "Rebecca's parents," he said without raising his eyes, "are filing for shared custody of the boys." "But why, after so long?" Richard let out a bitter laugh. The news about Amanda must have awakened old ghosts. They always blamed me for what happened to Rebecca. Now, with Amanda back in town, promoting her image as a benefactor of special education. He didn't complete the sentence, but Sarah understood. The puzzle pieces were beginning to fit together, revealing a much more complex picture than she had imagined. The peace they had built over the last few months was about to be tested by forces that had long been lurking in the shadows. The days that followed brought a palpable tension to the mansion. Richard spent hours in meetings with lawyers, and Sarah noticed that he avoided looking directly at his sons, as if he feared finding in their faces the judgment he so feared from his in-laws. The children, sensitive to the change in atmosphere, each reacted in their own way. Luke returned to his defensive posture. Matthew was more anxious than ever, and John increasingly took refuge in his world of miniatures and in the story notebook he shared with Michael. It was during a particularly tense afternoon that Sarah found an old photo that had fallen from one of Richard's folders. In it, a younger and smiling Richard embraced a radiant woman. Rebecca, Sarah presumed, while an older couple observed them with evident pride. "Those are our grandparents," Matthew's voice surprised her. The boy had approached silently and was now looking at the photo with a mixture of curiosity and sadness. "Do you remember them?" "A little," he answered, sitting beside her. "Grandma made chocolate cookies and Grandpa had a huge garden, but they stopped coming after." "After what, sweetheart?" Matthew bit his lip, hesitant. "After Mum got sad, very sad. Aunt Amanda said it was Dad's fault, that he didn't take proper care of her." Sarah felt her heart tighten. "And do you think that was true?" "I don't know," he whispered. "But Dad was also very sad. He cried in secret in his office. I sometimes saw him when I couldn't sleep." At that moment, Michael appeared carrying his drawing notebook. "Matthew, come see. John taught me to draw all the constellations that your mom used to show him." Matthew's face lit up momentarily. It was the first time Sarah had seen him show interest in memories of his mother without displaying distress. Following the children to John's room, Sarah found a touching scene. The notebook was open to a page where Michael had drawn a starry sky with constellations marked in gold. John pointed to each one, recalling the stories that Rebecca used to tell. "Mom used to say that stars are like people," John explained, his voice calm and clear. "Some shine brighter, others dimmer, but all are important to form the entire sky." Luke, who had been sitting quietly in a corner, finally spoke up. "She always knew what to say to make us feel better." "Like when you were afraid of the dark," Matthew added, and she invented that story about the Night Guardian." "What's the Night Guardian?" Michael asked, already reaching for his colored pencils. The triplets looked at each other, and for the first time in days they smiled simultaneously. For the next hour they recounted the story to Michael, who transformed it into colorful drawings in the notebook. Sarah observed from the doorway, amazed at how Rebecca's memories, previously a forbidden and painful topic, now served as a bridge to unite the children even more. Her contemplation was interrupted by footsteps in the hallway. It was Richard who stopped beside her, silently observing the scene. "They're remembering her stories," Sarah said softly. "The Night Guardian," Richard murmured, recognizing the drawings. "She invented that story on the first night Luke had nightmares. She spent hours drawing stars on the ceiling of his room with fluorescent paint." "You remember too?" "I remember everything," he admitted, his voice breaking. "Every story, every song, every moment. I just didn't know how to deal with those memories after she left. And her parents, what were they like before?" Richard closed his eyes for a moment. "They were wonderful. Frank and Claire loved Rebecca more than anything. When she started showing signs of instability, they begged me to seek professional help. But I was too busy with the company, convinced it was just a phase. And then Amanda appeared, offering support, saying she understood Rebecca better than all of us." His voice failed, and Sarah realized there was more to this story than he was ready to reveal. Before she could question further, Richard's phone rang. It was his lawyer. "We need to talk," he said after hanging up. "Amanda is giving a press conference tomorrow, and the subject. The subject is special education and family trauma. It can't be a coincidence." Sarah looked at the children, still absorbed in their stories and drawings, unaware of the storm approaching. How could they protect the fragile happiness they had built from the shadows of the past that threatened to engulf it? Amanda Taylor's interview dominated the morning news. Impeccably dressed, and with a studied smile, she spoke about her new foundation, dedicated to neurodivergent children and their families. But it was at the end of the press conference that the bomb dropped. "As a stepmother to a special child," she declared, looking directly at the cameras, "I saw firsthand how a lack of understanding can destroy a family. Unfortunately, not everyone is prepared to deal with differences." Richard turned off the television forcefully, his face a mask of contained fury. Sarah, who was watching by his side in the office, noticed his hands trembling. "She's using John," he said through clenched teeth. "Using my son to promote herself, exactly as she did before." "How did she enter your lives?" Sarah asked softly. Richard ran his hands over his face, suddenly looking exhausted. "She was the coordinator at the boys' first school. She approached Rebecca when John started showing adaptation difficulties. In the beginning, she seemed like a blessing. She had all the answers, all the solutions. But they weren't real solutions. They were manipulations," he replied, his voice laden with bitterness. "She convinced Rebecca that I didn't accept John as he was, that I was neglecting the signs. She began to create a chasm between us, feeding Rebecca's insecurities. And I was so focused on keeping the company running that I didn't notice what was happening inside my own home." A noise from the hallway interrupted the conversation. It was John, standing at the office door with his story notebook in hand. "Dad," he called timidly, "can I show you something?" Richard hesitated for a moment, but nodded. John entered and opened the notebook to a specific page. It was a drawing, made by Michael. It showed all of them, including Richard, sitting together in the garden under a starry sky. "It's our family," John explained, "like Mom always said it should be. Everyone together, looking at the same stars." Sarah saw something break in Richard's expression. He took his son in his arms, something she had never seen him do before, and hugged him tightly. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm sorry for not being the father you needed." "But you are," John replied with his characteristic honesty. "You just need to remember how to smile like in Mum's old photos." At that moment, Luke and Matthew appeared at the door, attracted by the unusual scene. Richard extended his arms, and for the first time in years, the four embraced. The moment was interrupted by the sound of the phone. It was Richard's lawyer again, but this time, the news was different. "Your in-laws want to talk," he informed after hanging up. "No lawyers, no court, just a family conversation." "When?" Sarah asked, noticing the apprehension on his face. "This afternoon," he replied, looking at his son still close by. They saw Amanda's interview and Claire, Rebecca's mother, said, "We need to join forces, that we can't let the past repeat itself." John, still embracing his father, asked, "Are Grandma and Grandpa coming back?" "Maybe," Richard answered cautiously, "but first we need to talk a lot." "Can they see our story notebook?" John suggested, "to remember Mum with us?" Richard swallowed hard, but nodded. "I think your mother would like that." Michael, who was observing everything from the doorway, approached timidly with his colored pencils. "Can we draw a special page for them?" The innocent suggestion from Michael provoked emotional smiles. Over the next few hours, the children worked together on a new page of the notebook, filling it with memories and hopes. Meanwhile, Sarah helped Richard prepare the house for the visit. During a pause, he confessed, "I never thought a hiring mistake could change our lives so much." "Sometimes mistakes are just the universe getting things right," Sarah replied, allowing herself a moment of vulnerability. The sound of the doorbell announced the grandparents' arrival. The moment of truth had come, and with it, the hope that the past could finally begin to heal. Frank and Claire Almond entered the mansion, like people stepping into territory both familiar and strange. Their gazes scanned the environment, noticing the small changes. Colorful drawings on the walls, organized toys in the corners, a place that, despite its intact elegance, now breathed life. Claire, an elegant woman with gray hair, stopped in front of one of Michael's drawings. It was a portrait of the triplets playing in the garden. "They seem happy," she commented, her voice breaking. "They are happy," Sarah replied softly, approaching, "especially in the last few months." "You must be Sarah," Frank said, extending his hand. "Our investigator mentioned you and your son." "Investigator?" Richard questioned, tense. "We needed to know, Richard," Claire explained. "After Amanda, after everything that happened, we needed to be sure the children were all right." The silence that followed was interrupted by the sound of small footsteps. The triplets appeared. At the top of the stairs, Michael right behind them. "Grandma, Grandpa." Matthew was the first to speak. Claire brought her hands to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. "Ah, you've grown so much." John, surprising everyone, was the first to come down and hug his grandparents. "We brought something to show you," he said, holding the story notebook. Sarah noticed Richard tensing, but he didn't interfere. The children guided their grandparents to the living room, where they began showing them the notebook. "It's like Mom's diary," Luke explained. "We write stories, and Michael draws them." Claire turned the pages with trembling hands, Frank beside her, equally moved. "She loved writing about you," the grandmother commented. "She had a notebook for each of you." "We found John's," Matthew revealed. "That's where we got the idea." Richard, who was observing the scene in silence, finally spoke. "Did you bring the other notebooks?" Frank and Claire exchanged surprised looks. "You knew about them?" "Rebecca showed them to me once," he replied, his voice low, "but after she got sick, I never found them." "They're with us," Frank said, taking a folder from his briefcase. "We came to return them. They belong to the boys." While the children explored the old notebooks with their grandparents, Sarah led Richard to a more private corner of the room. "Are you okay?" she asked, noticing his troubled expression. "I don't know," he admitted. "Seeing them here, with her notebooks, it's like the entire past returning at once." "Maybe it's time to face it," Sarah gently suggested, "for the children's sake." At that moment, Michael approached them, carrying a new drawing. "I just made this," he said timidly. "It's everyone together." The drawing showed the entire family, including the grandparents sitting in the garden under the stars. In the center, an ethereal figure with a gentle smile hovered over everyone. "It's their mom," Michael explained. "John told me what she was like." Claire, who had silently approached, sobbed upon seeing the drawing. "It's exactly how she would want it to be," she said, looking at Richard. "All together, taking care of each other." "Amanda contacted us last week," Frank suddenly revealed. "She wanted our support for the custody case." Richard stiffened, but Frank continued. "We refused. We saw how she tried to manipulate Rebecca, how she fed her insecurities until the end. We won't allow her to do the same with the boys." "That's why we came," Claire added. "Not to take the children from you, Richard, but to be part of their lives again, if you'll allow it." John, who was listening attentively to everything, took his father's hand and his grandmother's, joining them. "Mom always said that family is like a constellation," he recited. "Each star shines in its own way, but together they form something special." Sarah observed the silent tears streaming down Richard's face as he squeezed his former mother-in-law's, and it was as if years of resentment and guilt were slowly beginning to dissolve. Michael, always sensitive to important moments, picked up his pencils and began drawing again. "I'm going to make a new page in the notebook," he announced, "to mark the day when the constellation became complete again." The presence of the grandparents brought a new dynamic to the mansion. Claire visited regularly, bringing with her the aroma of homemade cookies and stories from the past. Frank dedicated hours to the abandoned garden, transforming it again into the green paradise that Rebecca had loved so much. Peace seemed to have finally found its place in that house, but the tranquility didn't last long. On an apparently ordinary afternoon, Sarah noticed an unusual silence on the upper floor. Michael, who would normally be drawing with John, was nowhere to be found. "John," she called, trying to control the anxiety in her voice, "where is Michael?" The boy avoided her gaze, something rare in his behavior. Luke and Matthew, who were playing nearby, also seemed uncomfortable. "John," Sarah insisted, "I need to know where he is." "He's safe," John finally answered, his voice almost a whisper. "I promise." Sarah's heart raced. "What do you mean, safe? Where is he?" It was Luke who finally revealed. "We hid him." "Hid him? Why?" "Because of her," Matthew pointed to the window. In the garden, talking with Frank, was Amanda Taylor. Sarah felt her blood freeze. "How long has he been hidden?" "Since we saw her car arriving," Luke explained. "John had the idea. He said we couldn't let her hurt Michael like she hurt Mom." The revelation hit Sarah like a punch. The children, in their childish logic, were trying to protect Michael from the woman who, in their minds, had caused so much suffering to their mother. "I need you to tell me where he is. Now." John took her hand, leading her to an almost invisible door in the library. It was a small service room rarely used. Inside, wrapped in a blanket and surrounded by John's miniatures, was Michael, sleeping peacefully. Sarah released the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her son was fine, but the situation was more serious than she had imagined. "Why do you think she would hurt Michael?" Sarah asked gently, after waking up her son and making sure he was okay. The triplets looked at each other until John began to speak. "I heard her once, talking on the phone when Mom was sick. She said that different people only bring problems, that it was better to separate the family. And she looked at Michael the same way she used to look at me," John continued, his voice trembling. "When she came to visit last week while you were at the market, that same look from when she said I needed to be fixed." Sarah felt a wave of protection rise in her chest. "Amanda was here? Why didn't you tell me?" "She said it was a secret," Matthew explained, "that she was preparing a good surprise for the family." The sound of footsteps in the hallway made everyone turn. It was Richard, his face a mask of concern. "Sarah," he called, "we need to talk. Amanda is making accusations. Serious ones." Before he could continue, Claire appeared behind him, breathless. "Richard, she's giving a live interview. She's talking about child neglect in the mansion." Sarah's cell phone vibrated with a message from social services. Her heart sank as she read the content. An investigation would be opened to assess the care conditions of both the triplets and Michael. It wasn't a coincidence she appeared today, Richard realized, his voice laden with contained anger. She planned all of this. Michael, who had remained quiet until then, surprised everyone by speaking. "But we have the notebook. It shows we're happy here." John immediately grabbed the story notebook, hugging it to his chest. "And we have Mom's notebooks too. They show the truth." Sarah looked at Richard, then at Claire, who still held the tablet with Amanda's interview being broadcasted. The peace they had built was threatened, but this time they weren't alone in the fight. "We're going to need help," Claire declared, picking up the phone. "Frank still has contacts in the press, and I have some stories about Amanda that I've never told anyone." Richard nodded, for the first time seeming truly grateful for his in-law's presence. "I won't allow her to hurt our family. Not again." Sarah hugged Michael and John, who still clung to the notebook, while watching Luke and Matthew approach their father seeking comfort. The battle ahead would be difficult, but they would face it together, like the constellation they had become. The mansion transformed into a fortress in the days that followed. Frank and Claire practically moved in, determined to protect their grandchildren and support Richard. The social services investigation was scheduled for the following week, and everyone worked together to face what was coming. Sarah found Richard late at night in his office, organizing a pile of documents. Among them was Rebecca's original notebook. "I found something," he said when she entered, "something I had never noticed before." In the last pages of the notebook, Rebecca had written a kind of letter. "Dear Richard, if you're reading this, it means I wasn't strong enough. Amanda says you'll never understand our John, that it would be better for him to live in a special institution. But she's wrong. You just need to learn to see the world through his eyes, as I learned. Our boys are perfect exactly as they are. Luke with his protective strength, Matthew with his sensitive heart, and John with his unique way of seeing beauty in every detail. Don't let anyone try to change them. Forgive me for not being stronger. Forgive me for allowing Amanda's words to poison our happiness. She never understood that family isn't about perfection, it's about unconditional love." Richard had tears in his eyes when he finished reading. "How was I so blind? How did I not realize what Amanda was doing?" "You were suffering too," Sarah replied softly. "Sometimes pain prevents us from seeing what's right in front of us." A noise at the door drew their attention. John was standing there in his star-patterned pajamas, holding his precious story notebook. "I can't sleep," he said. "Can I show you something?" Richard signaled for him to approach. John opened the notebook to a new page that Sarah hadn't seen yet. Michael had drawn all of them, the entire family, including Rebecca as a bright star in the sky, together facing a dark shadow that resembled Amanda. "Michael said that happy stories always have a good ending," John explained, "even when there are scary parts in the middle." Richard hugged his son, allowing himself to show the emotion he had repressed for so long. "Your mother would be so proud of you, son. Of all of you." At that moment, Luke and Matthew appeared at the door, followed by Michael. It was as if the children had a sixth sense for important moments. "We can't sleep either," Luke admitted. "How about some hot chocolate?" Claire appeared behind them, already dressed in her floral robe. Rebecca always said that hot chocolate was the best remedy for sleepless nights. In the kitchen, while Claire prepared the drink with the animated help of the children, Frank showed Richard some news on his tablet. "Amanda's reputation isn't as immaculate as she thinks," he explained. "I found other families who went through similar situations with her. They're willing to speak out. And I have all the messages she sent to Rebecca," Claire added, serving the steaming mugs. "Manipulative messages that made my daughter doubt herself and everyone around her." Sarah observed the scene with a full heart. Michael, sitting between John and Luke, drew new heroes in his notebook. This time, they were all of them, each with a special superpower. "What's my superpower?" John asked, peeking at the drawing. "You see things that no one else sees," Michael replied without hesitation, "like special patterns and magical details. And Dad's? His heart is so big that he's learning to love again, even when he's afraid." Richard, who was listening to the conversation, swallowed hard. Sarah realized that he was finally beginning to understand what Rebecca had always known, that true love doesn't need perfection to be complete. Tomorrow, Frank announced, we'll start telling our story. The true story, not the version Amanda wants the world to believe. And we'll use the notebooks, John suggested, his eyes shining. Both Mom's and ours. Yes, Claire smiled, because the truth is in the small things, in the moments we share, in the stories we build together. As the children finally began to yawn, overcome by the hot chocolate and the warmth of the moment, Sarah noticed that Michael had added one more detail to his drawing, a large heart connecting all the figures with the words, "Our Constellation," written in colorful letters. The social services visit was scheduled for that morning. Sarah was helping the children get ready when she noticed John being particularly quiet, organizing and reorganizing his miniatures. "Is everything okay, dear?" she asked, sitting beside him. "What if they don't understand?" he murmured. "Aunt, Amanda always said that people like me needed special places, away from family." Sarah felt her heart tighten. "John, look at me. You are perfect exactly as you are. Your mother knew that, your father knows that, all of us know it. But what if they take Michael away because of me? Why would it be your fault?" "Because it was my idea to hide him," John confessed, tears streaming down. "I just wanted to protect him from Aunt Amanda, like I couldn't protect Mom." The revelation hit Sarah like lightning. Before she could respond, Richard appeared at the door, having overheard the conversation. "Son," he called softly, approaching and kneeling in front of John. "Nothing that happened to your mother was your fault. I was the one who took too long to see what Amanda was doing to our family." John looked at his father with watery eyes. "But she always said I made Mom sad, that I was too difficult." "No," Richard firmly interrupted. "Your mother was never sad because of you. It was Amanda who made her doubt everything, who poisoned our happiness with lies." At that moment, Michael entered the room carrying the story notebook. "Look what I drew," he said, showing a new page. The drawing portrayed John as a superhero, using his miniatures as a special power to protect his family. At his side, Rebecca appeared as a guardian angel, smiling proudly. "You're a hero," Michael declared with the simplicity characteristic of children. "Heroes protect the people they love even when they're scared." Luke and Matthew, who had silently joined the group, nodded in agreement. "And today," Luke added with determination, "we're going to show everyone that our family is special just the way it is." Claire appeared at the door, carrying an old "Trace, I found something else that might help," she announced. "They're videos that Rebecca recorded of the boys. They show how she understood and celebrated the uniqueness of each one." As they watched some excerpts from the videos, the family witnessed precious moments. John enthusiastically explaining his organizational patterns, Luke protecting his brothers. During a storm, Matthew playing piano with his mother. In each scene, Rebecca radiated love and understanding. "She always knew," Richard murmured, moved. "She always knew how to love each of you in the right way." The sound of the doorbell announced the arrival of the social workers. But now, instead of fear, the family felt strengthened. They had proof of the love that united them, in the notebooks, in the videos, and especially in the small moments they built together every day. "Let's show them our constellation," John said, holding the story notebook with determination. Sarah observed how Richard hugged his sons before going down to receive the visitors. The cold and distant man she had met months ago had given way to a father who finally understood that love doesn't need to be perfect to be true. Michael took her hand, smiling confidently. "Everything will be all right, Mom. Happy stories always. Have good endings, remember?" Claire and Frank positioned themselves strategically in the room, ready to present the evidence they had gathered against Amanda. But more important than any material proof was the palpable love that filled every corner of that house. As they descended the stairs to face this new challenge, Sarah realized that Michael was right. This wasn't just a story about overcoming or redemption. It was a story about how true love can heal wounds, break down walls, and create bonds stronger than any adversity. The social services visit transformed into a decisive moment for the family. Two social workers, Sandra and Mariana, conducted the investigation with professionalism and sensitivity. As they toured the mansion, John surprised everyone by taking the initiative to show his room. "This is where we tell our stories," he explained, presenting the notebook he shared with Michael. "It's like how Mum used to do it." Sandra, the more experienced social worker, flipped through the notebook with genuine interest. "Can you tell me more about these stories?" John began to explain each page, his voice gaining confidence as he spoke. Michael complimented with details about the drawings, creating a harmony that didn't go unnoticed by the professionals. "And this drawing?" Mariana asked, pointing to a page that showed the family gathered under the stars. "It's our constellation," John replied simply. "Each one shines in their own way, but together we form something special. Mum taught us that." Claire took the opportunity to present Rebecca's old videos. The images clearly showed how she understood and celebrated the particularities of each son, especially John. "Rebecca was an extraordinary mother," Claire explained, her voice breaking. "She saw beauty where others saw problems. Amanda, she distorted that." "Can you tell us more about Amanda Taylor?" Sandra asked, perceiving there was more to the story. Richard, who until then had maintained silence, began to speak. He told about how Amanda approached the family, how she manipulated Rebecca's insecurities, how she created divisions between them. "We found other families," Frank added, presenting a folder with testimonials. "Families who went through similar situations with her. Always the same pattern. She approaches offering help, identifies vulnerabilities, and then uses it to promote herself," Sarah completed. "As she's doing now, using John in her campaigns without our authorization." The social workers exchanged significant looks while taking notes. That's when Michael, who had been quietly drawing, approached with a new page from the notebook. "I made this just now," he said, showing the drawing to the visitors. The illustration showed two scenes side by side. In one, the family was separated and sad, with a dark shadow clearly representing Amanda hovering over them. In the other, they were all united, smiling, with Rebecca shining like a guiding star above the family. "Impressive how children perceive everything," Mariana commented, carefully observing the drawing. "Michael has that gift," Sarah smiled. "He sees the truth in people's hearts and transforms it into art." Sandra closed her notebook. "I think we've seen enough for today, but before we go, we'd like to have a word in private with John." The boy, surprisingly, didn't show anxiety. He picked up some of his favorite miniatures and followed the social workers to a nearby room. Through the half-open door, the family could hear his clear and confident voice explaining how he organized his collection, how Michael helped him tell stories, how his father was learning to smile again. "And about Aunt Amanda?" they heard Sandra gently ask. "She doesn't understand," John responded with wisdom beyond his years. "She thinks being different is something bad that needs to be fixed. But Mom taught me that being different is just a special way of being." When the social workers finally departed, they left not only favorable preliminary reports, but also a sense that the truth was finally coming to light. "Are they going to help us?" Luke asked, after everyone gathered in the living room. "Yes," Richard replied, embracing his sons. "But more important than that, we help each other, like a true family." Michael was already busy creating a new page in the notebook, this one showing the family facing and overcoming their fears together. Sarah observed how John approached to help him with the details, how Luke and Matthew contributed ideas, how Richard truly smiled seeing his children happy. Claire and Frank watched the scene with tears in their eyes, finally witnessing the healing they had so desired for their family. Rebecca's love, which had never truly left them, continued to live through the stories, the drawings, and especially the strengthened bonds that now united them. The court hearing was scheduled for that morning. The courtroom was packed. On one side, Amanda Taylor with her team of expensive lawyers and a confident expression. On the other, the united Miller family, including Claire and Frank. Sarah adjusted Michael's tie when she noticed his small hands trembling. "Are you nervous, son? What if we can't stay together?" he whispered, clutching the story notebook that rarely left his side. "We will," she replied, trying to convey a confidence she didn't completely feel. The truth always finds its way. In the courthouse waiting room, John organized and reorganized his favorite miniatures that he had brought hidden in his pocket, a habit that calmed him in moments of anxiety. Luke and Matthew remained close to their brother, forming a silent, protective barrier. Richard, dressed in his best suit, seemed more nervous than on the day of his first board meeting. Claire held his hand, a gesture that would have been unthinkable months ago. "Rebecca would be proud," she whispered to her son-in-law, "to see how you finally opened your heart." Before Richard could respond, the courtroom doors opened. The moment had arrived. The first hour was dominated by Amanda's lawyers. They painted a calculated picture: Richard as an absent father, Sarah as an opportunist, the children as victims of emotional neglect, Amanda sitting elegantly, occasionally dabbed at fake tears while being described as a misunderstood savior. It was when they called John to testify that everything changed. "I don't want to go alone," he said, clutching Michael's hand. "I need my friend with me." The judge, after a moment of consideration, allowed it. The two children ascended together to the witness stand, the story notebook firmly held between them. "John," Amanda's lawyer began with false sweetness, "isn't it true that your father never understood your special needs? That Ms. Taylor was the only one who really tried to help you?" John looked at Michael, who nodded encouragingly, and then opened the notebook. "Can I show you something?" he asked the judge, who, intrigued, agreed. "This is our story notebook," John began, his voice gaining strength. "We started it because I found the diary my mother wrote about me. She understood me. She knew I didn't need to be fixed." Page after page, John showed how his family had transformed. Michael's drawings told a story of healing, love, and acceptance. "Aunt, Amanda said I was a problem," John continued, surprising everyone with his clarity. "She made Mom cry, saying I needed to go to a special institution. But look." He turned to a specific page where Michael had drawn John teaching his brothers about constellations, his father smiling proudly in the background. "Now everyone understands that being different isn't bad. It's just different." Amanda shifted uncomfortably in her chair when John mentioned the messages she sent to Rebecca. Claire seized the moment to hand the judge the folder with the evidence: manipulative messages, testimonials from other families, favorable reports from social services. Michael, sensing his friend needed support, took his pencils and began to draw right there, on the witness stand. The judge, instead of reprimanding him, watched with interest. "What are you drawing?" he asked gently. "Our family fighting against fear," Michael replied, showing a sketch where everyone was united, facing a shadow that was dissipating. Amanda's confident expression began to falter. Her lawyer tried to interrupt, but the judge was completely absorbed in the children's sincere demonstration. It was then that a strong thunderclap shook the courtroom, and the lights flickered. A storm had arrived, as if the sky itself wanted to participate in this decisive moment. "Can I say one more thing?" John asked, his voice trembling slightly with the noise of the storm. The judge nodded, and John took from his pocket his most precious miniature, the small golden lion he had given to Michael during his attack. "Aunt Amanda says she wants to protect us, but she only wants to separate us. Real family stays together even when they're afraid, like now." At that moment, another even stronger thunderclap caused the lights to go out completely. In the darkness, John's voice continued, clear and courageous, "But it's okay, because now we know we don't need to be afraid of the dark. We just need to remember that we're a constellation. We shine brighter when we're together." When the courtroom lights came back on, something had changed in the atmosphere of the room. Amanda Taylor was visibly shaken, her veneer of perfection beginning to crack. Her lawyer frantically tried to regain control of the situation, but it was too late. The judge, after carefully examining all the evidence, including the social services reports and testimonials from other families affected by Amanda, called a recess for his final decision. In the waiting room, The storm continued to rage outside, but inside a peculiar calm had settled. John and Michael worked together on a new page of the notebook, while Luke and Matthew observed, occasionally suggesting details to add to the drawing. "What are you creating?" Sarah asked, noticing the intense concentration on the children's faces. "It's a surprise," Michael replied, protecting the drawing with his hand. "We'll only show it when it's finished." Richard, who was nervously pacing the room, stopped beside Claire and Frank. "Thank you," he said simply, "for not giving up on our family." "We should be thanking you," Frank replied, "for allowing us to be part of it again." Claire took her son-in-law's hand. "Rebecca always knew there was goodness in your heart, Richard. She just wanted you to allow yourself to show it." The sound of footsteps in the hallway announced the judge's return. Everyone went back into the courtroom, hearts racing. "Before delivering my decision," the judge began, "I would like to see the drawing the children were making." Michael and John looked at each other, surprised, but proudly took the notebook to the judge. On the new page, they had drawn the courtroom transformed into a garden, where all the shadows of the past were turning into colorful flowers. In the center, the entire family, including Rebecca as a bright star, smiled together. "Extraordinary," the judge murmured, before addressing the room. "This case has made me reflect deeply on the true meaning of family and care." He paused, looking directly at Amanda. "Ms. Taylor, your actions, although disguised as concern, reveal a disturbing pattern of manipulation and control. The evidence presented is conclusive." Amanda tried to protest, but the judge raised his hand, silencing her. "In addition to denying your request for interference in this family, I am forwarding a recommendation for your foundation to be investigated." Turning to Richard and Sarah, his tone softened. "As for you, I see a family that has learned that love and acceptance are more powerful than any artificial perfection. The grandparents' request for shared custody will be granted, not as an imposition, but as a legal recognition of the bond you have already rebuilt." John, who had returned to Michael's side, whispered something in his friend's ear, who immediately began drawing again. "Your Honor," Michael called timidly, "can I show you one more thing?" The judge, breaking all protocol, smiled and nodded. Michael raised the notebook, showing a new drawing. The scales of justice, but instead of weights, it carried hearts on one side and flowers on the other. "John said that real justice is when love wins over fear," Michael explained. Amanda abruptly stood up and left the room, her mask of perfection completely destroyed. Her lawyer followed, leaving behind only the echo of high heels on the marble floor. Outside, the storm was beginning to pass. A ray of sunlight broke through the courtroom's stained glass, creating a rainbow that seemed to bless the reunited family. Richard embraced his sons, including Michael, in the hug. Sarah, Claire, and Frank joined them, forming a perfect circle of love and protection. "Look," John pointed out the window. "A shooting star." "Impossible," Luke began to say. "It's daytime But everyone saw it, a special glow in the sky, as if Rebecca was sending her own sign of approval. "You know what that means?" Michael asked, already reaching for his colored pencils. "We need a new page in the notebook to mark the day when our constellation truly became complete." And so, as the family left the courthouse united and strengthened, Michael and John began to draw one more chapter of their story. A story that proved that true love knows no limits, demands no perfection, and above all has the power to heal even the deepest wounds. 6 months had passed since the courtroom hearing. The Miller mansion, previously a place of silence and shadows, now overflowed with life and joy. The garden, lovingly restored by Frank, displayed the colorful flowers that Rebecca had loved so much. The kitchen constantly exuded the aroma of Claire's cookies, and music once again echoed through the corridors. On an especially significant afternoon, Sarah organized a small celebration. It was the 1-year anniversary of her accidental arrival at the mansion. The children helped with the preparations, each in their unique way. John, with his characteristic precision, organized the miniatures in a special exhibition in the living room. Each piece told a part of the family's story, from the difficult moments to the recent achievements. Michael accompanied his friend, drawing each set in his notebook, now almost completely filled. "We need a new notebook," Michael commented, showing the last available pages. "What if we make a different one this time?" John suggested, his eyes shining with the idea. "We could use those old photos that Grandma found." Luke, who was helping Matthew decorate the piano with flowers from the garden, approached with interest. "Could we also include the sheet music for the songs Mom used to play?" "And the Night Guardian drawings," Matthew added enthusiastically. Sarah observed the boys' interaction with a full heart. In 1 year, the changes were impressive. Luke had softened his defensive posture, allowing himself to just be a child. Matthew had discovered his voice through music, playing more and more on the restored piano. And John was flourishing, accepted and loved exactly as he was. Richard entered the room carrying a mysterious box. His face, previously permanently tense, now broke into frequent smiles, especially when he looked at Sarah. "I found something special," he announced, placing the box on the table. Rebecca had a project she never got to complete. Inside the box were craft materials, old photographs, and an unfinished notebook with the title, "Our Story in Stars." It was a family album project she had planned to make with her sons. "We can finish it for her," Michael exclaimed, already imagining the artistic possibilities. Claire, who was entering with a tray of freshly baked cookies, stopped, moved at seeing her daughter's project. She always said she wanted to create something that would unite the boys' different forms of expression. "And now we have enough artists to realize that dream," Frank commented, looking fondly at Michael. Richard took Sarah's hand, leading her to the veranda, while the children and grandparents began planning. The new project. The sunset painted the sky with shades of pink and gold, creating a perfect moment. "I never imagined that a human resources error could change our lives so much," he said, his voice soft. "Maybe it wasn't an error," Sarah replied. "Maybe it was Rebecca, guiding our constellation to complete itself." Richard took a small box from his pocket. "Speaking of constellation, I realized something is missing to make it official." Sarah's heart raced upon seeing the delicate ring studded with small stars. "Richard, marry me?" he asked simply. "Not because I need someone to take care of the boys, but because you taught us to love again, all of us." Before Sarah could respond, they heard a small commotion coming from the living room. The children had followed the couple to the veranda, unable to contain their curiosity. "Say yes, Mom," Michael implored, his eyes shining with expectation. "Please," the triplets added in unison. Claire and Frank watched from the doorway, emotional smiles on their faces. The love that Rebecca had so desired for her family had finally found its way. "Yes," Sarah answered, tears of happiness streaming down her face. 1,000 times, yes." The boys celebrated, and Michael immediately reached for his notebook to record the moment. John approached him, suggesting details for the drawing. "Put a really bright star above all of us. The biggest one." "Mom?" Luke asked softly. "Yes," John smiled. "She's always here in our constellation." Richard embraced Sarah and the children, while Claire and Frank joined the group. The sunset continued its spectacle, as if the sky itself was celebrating this moment of love and renewal. The wedding day dawned with a perfectly blue sky. The mansion's garden, chosen as the setting for the ceremony, was transformed. Frank had created a corridor of flowers leading to an arch decorated with small lights like earthly stars. Michael and John had spent the previous week creating special decorations, framed drawings telling the family's story, from the difficult moments to the present happiness. The final picture, purposely left half-finished, waited to record this special day. The triplets, elegant in their blue suits, had special roles in the ceremony. Luke would carry the rings, Matthew would play piano during Sarah's entrance, and John had prepared a special surprise. When the music began, all the guests turned to see Sarah, radiant in her simple but elegant dress. Michael walked by her side, proud in his role as page boy, but it was upon reaching the altar that the true surprise happened. John stood up, holding his microphone with newfound confidence. His voice, clear and emotional, began to recite. "Mom always said that families are like constellations. Some stars shine brighter, others softer, but all are important to form the entire sky. Our constellation was incomplete until new stars arrived to make our sky shine again. There wasn't a dry eye in the garden. Richard especially struggled to contain his emotion at seeing his most reserved son express himself so beautifully. Claire and Frank, seated in the front row, held the new family album they had created together, Rebecca's Unfinished, project now completed with love by many hands. Its pages told a story of loss, healing, and new beginnings. During the exchange of vows, Michael surprised everyone by giving Sarah and Richard a special drawing. It showed Rebecca as a guardian angel, blessing the union with a radiant smile. "She's here," Michael whispered. "John helped me draw her exactly as she was in the photos." The most touching moment came when, after the ceremony, the children guided the guests to a special part of the garden. There, Frank had created a small observatory, a circular space surrounded by roses, with a telescope in the center. "So we can always see our stars," John explained, adjusting the telescope with his characteristic precision. At night, during the celebration, Matthew gifted the couple with a song he had secretly composed. The piano notes told their own story of love and healing, making Claire cry as she recognized touches of Rebecca's style in her grandson's melody. Luke, always the protector, gave a brief speech that surprised everyone with its maturity. "Before, we thought family had to be perfect. Now we know that family is about loving each other, even when it's difficult, especially when it's difficult." As the celebration continued, Sarah and Richard found a quiet moment to observe their family. Michael and John showed the guests their art and miniature exhibition. Matthew played piano with his grandmother, while Luke taught Frank how to use the telescope. "You know what's most amazing?" Sarah commented, resting her head on her now husband's shoulder. "Each of them has found their own way to shine." "Thanks to you," Richard replied, kissing her forehead. "You taught us to look beyond the shadows." A sudden movement caught their attention. The children had gathered around the last blank frame in the exhibition. Michael, with his colored pencils, began to draw the wedding scene. "Don't forget the brightest star," John reminded, pointing to the sky in the drawing. "And all the other stars that helped us get here," Luke added. "Like a true constellation," Matthew completed, his hands still on the piano keys. Sarah watched the children working together on the final drawing, each contributing in their unique way. Michael with his art, John with his precise details, Luke with his protective ideas, and Matthew adding musical notes around the scene. The night sky above them was perfectly starry, as if the universe itself was celebrating the union of this special family. A family built not by obligation or convention, but by choice, love, and understanding. And somewhere among the brightest stars, Rebecca smiled, knowing that her family had finally found their way back to light, to love, and, most importantly, to each other.